I'm head of the BBC Somali service. It was a shock to us as well as to our listeners when last year the British government had in mind to cut our service along with others. It would have destroyed very valuable links between the BBC and an important part of the Horn of Africa. This is radio country. Everyone in Somalia, if he can afford it, will have a radio.
BBC London ساعة أفريقيا عبري وشنتي بركي وحنا.
At 5:30, everything stops and people switch into the BBC Somali service. The type of program is to suit the various types of Somali speakers, sophisticated people from the towns, farmers, nomadic herdsmen, and we tried to explain to them in a simple language as possible what world events are about, Somali traditional culture, poetry, which is extremely popular. We do have a program in which people write to us to try and trace missing relatives. I used to think it was one of my achievements until I got a letter from a lady saying, "What the hell do you mean by putting my name over the radio as being missing? You don't know the reason why I'm missing. It might be I just don't want my husband. And I think you are interfering in the personal rights of people." And then we couldn't put that out, but after a couple of months we had a similar letter from a man saying, "I understand from my friends that you've been trying to trace me. Why? What have I done to you?" Although our programs are very popular, I do find sometimes when I come to Somalia on a duty tour that there are people in high places who are really very cross with us on the grounds that certain of our programs are not complementary to the activities of the government.
The fact that the BBC Somali service, which is so much respected and admired generally in Somalia, is putting over some of the views, quite often the views of the Somali dissidents, which are totally hostile, of course, to the present government in Somalia, is a major irritant, major difficulty for me in my relations with the Somali government, with President Siad and his ministers.
Some informations are not accurate, are said in a way, perhaps such of sensational thing, not properly evaluated and not true.
What can you do? You cannot please everybody. We really believe that the ordinary Somali wants to know what is going on from sources which are not available from his own local radio. The young people today are the leaders of tomorrow, they say. Their attitudes towards happenings in the world can be governed by what they listen to. I think it's a great pity that a country with Britain's reputation now, suddenly they say, we don't need links with certain countries because we must have small savings. It is not even sufficient for 1 mile of tarmac road in Britain. A country which straddles the Gulf of Aden as well as the Indian Ocean is very, very important today. And there's no doubt about it that if, as Britain threatened last year to cut down, among other services, the Somali services, that other countries hostile to Britain's interests would immediately step in. In the Broadcasting League today, Britain is not at the top. She's somewhere down in the 2nd division. And to go further down to the 3rd division would mean to say people are going to get promoted.
It was a matter of national pride, I think, on the part of the Somalis, that this service should not be stopped. That if the government withdrew that service, it would be a slap in the face. Disaster was avoided because the government was forced to change its mind, and the reason was the enormous support we got. Certain other services were lopped a bit, the French, for example, and the Portuguese service to Brazil. Now, it's very ironic that almost throughout our history, every time the Foreign Office cuts a service, you can be almost certain that within months there will be a crisis in that country or in that part of the world. And of course, that's precisely what happened over the Falklands conflict. How badly we needed a very full Brazilian service at that time. However, we did have the Spanish Latin American service. It had been broadcasting for 40 years. And of course, immediately the Falklands conflict began, millions of people started to tune in to that service throughout Latin America.
Hello, Mary White back with you again with another edition of Calling the Falklands.
Another aspect of this continuity was this little program that we had been broadcasting for 30 years, Calling the Falklands. And I think, quite honestly, the Foreign Office had almost forgotten about it. It cost a pittance, and all it was a little request program.
Right, have you prepared the message? And who is it to?
It's to my father. His name is Jack Abbott, Flagstaff House, Port Stanley. Many supportive messages have been received by Mike and Dot and Bill.
It proved a great lifeline, and goodness knows Whitehall realised this. Ministers and leading officials were queuing up to get on that programme.
We absolutely depended upon it for all information. You got information in England before we got it here. Once when the British came and the fighting started, then we were not getting the information of what was happening at St. Carlos or Goose Green. We got it through the BBC.
Calling the Falklands was able to give us, apart from the messages, of course, the personal messages, it was able to give us in-depth news about the Falklands, things that you wouldn't normally hear on the World Service. The little things, the little tiny small things, which to the Falkland Islander at that time was so valuable, so important, that people would just be waiting. In our house, we had a lot of people living with us, sort of refugees from the top of the town, and we'd be tuning in and saying, oh God, where is it? Aren't they going to come on tonight? 10 minutes before the programme started. It was incredible value, that programme. I don't think you could ever really try and tell even the BBC how valuable that programme was to the Falkland Islanders.
You may remember a press report from Argentina which stated that the Padre with the Argentine forces in Port Stanley had stated that not only had all the Argentine troops been listening to the BBC at the end of the conflict because they realized that Buenos Aires was broadcasting nothing but propaganda, but that the commander of the Argentine forces, General Menendez, also was listening, and that it was actually the BBC broadcasts which finally persuaded him to surrender. Now, if ever one wants an example of how important it is to maintain credibility during not only peacetime, but also during war, surely that was it. Since martial law was imposed in Poland, the Russians have done their best to jam our broadcasts, but we're still getting through, and the response has been enormous and has aroused great irritation on the part of the Polish regime, who have protested to the British government.
The BBC, for me, was really the only source of information to learn what was going on in Gdańsk and other towns, because there was almost no communication between Poland. And the Polish sources of information at that time were not really reliable.
We gathered in the evening mostly, or even late evenings at night, to listen to the news, BBC News, and to have some contact and some feeling that we are still a part of the rest of the world.